Are we going to do this? Let's do it. It's Tuesday, November 29th, 2022. I'm David Feldman. On Monday, yesterday, the stock market dropped 500 points. That's nearly 1.5%, as traders fear mass protests in China could cut into corporate profits. Also, cause for alarm on Wall Street is the Chinese government locking down their entire country after 40,000 new cases of COVID have been reported. Tens of thousands of Chinese have taken to the streets, protesting what they consider draconian measures to combat the virus. Universities around the country protested the government's lockdown of Uyghurs in the Muslim region of Xinjiang, where at least 10 people were killed, another 10 injured after a fire ripped through an apartment building where residents were reportedly trapped due to China's zero COVID policy, where authorities sealed the doors shut to prevent anyone from leaving. There are reports of Chinese citizens around the country locked inside apartment buildings to prevent the spread. Riot police bludgeoned workers at Foxconn, the world's largest manufacturer of iPhones, when assembly line workers protested working conditions as well as living conditions inside their factory dormitories. The workers also complain of broken contractual promises on how much they would get paid. Residents of Houston, Texas this morning are still being told to boil their water and then throw it at a liberal's face. I'm kidding. It's Texas. They have guns. Why would they need boiling water? Millions of Houstonians have been told to boil their water, and school has been canceled after a power outage shut down a water treatment plant. Residents are told to boil their water for 2 minutes if they plan to drink it, bathe in it, brush their teeth, or do some freelance waterboarding for the CIA. Houston is America's fourth largest city, although if they don't get the water turned back on soon, that could change pretty quickly. The Washington Post reports that many of Houston's low-income residents stopped drinking tap water back in 2017 after Hurricane Harvey created sewage overflows that made the water undrinkable for people who don't like the taste of diarrhea in their lemonade. Last year, it was determined that Houston is in violation of the Clean Water Act and was already under a federal consent decree before this week's new boil mandate was issued. 25% of Houston is African American. In Flint, Michigan, where more than half the population is African American, lead is still being found in their drinking water. The Environmental Protection Agency on October 31st of this year, that's almost a month ago, said drinking water in Jackson, Mississippi was finally safe to drink after residents went 2 months without any. Jackson, Mississippi's population is 83% African American. The United States government is planning to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who has been in a British prison since 2019, awaiting trial here in the United States for espionage. If convicted, Assange faces 175 years in a maximum security prison for exposing, 12 years ago, criminal wrongdoing by our military in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not a single member of our military has been tried for the crimes Assange exposed. His leaks were published in the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and El País, who wrote an open letter on Monday calling on the Justice Department here in America to drop their charges against Julian Assange. In their open letter, they wrote, quote, "This indictment sets a dangerous precedent and threatens to undermine America's First Amendment and the freedom of the press." The Senate's Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee issued a report on Monday saying the FBI and our Department of Homeland Security have failed to address the rising tide of white nationalist anti-government domestic terrorists. The report says that while the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have acknowledged domestic terrorism is a much bigger threat than, say, terrorists from Al-Qaeda, they still have directed most of their resources towards addressing threats from foreign terrorists. The problem Americans face is homegrown domestic terrorism. That's why the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act specifically mandated that law enforcement must keep track of domestic terrorists and then report to Congress each year. But according to this new report, law enforcement has failed to obey that order. They are not reporting on domestic terrorism. Republicans, of course, are against keeping track of domestic terrorists because all, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, I mean all domestic terrorists share a right-wing anti-government ideology with the Republican Party. There were 110 domestic terrorist attacks or plans for domestic terrorist attacks uncovered in 2020. That's a 244% increase over the previous years. All were carried out by right-wing extremists. Salon reports this week that a recent study suggests that 90% of right-wing terrorists have been radicalized through social media. Jurors in the trial against right-wing domestic terrorist Stewart Rhodes, the Yale Law School graduate who founded the Oath Keepers, the jurors begin their third day of deliberations on Tuesday. Rhodes, along with 4 others, has been accused of plotting to block the peaceful transfer of power on January 6, 2021. Although our Justice Department has secured hundreds of convictions stemming from the January 6 insurrection, Rhodes is the first to be charged with seditious conspiracy. During his testimony, Rhodes said he was in Washington that day awaiting President Trump's order to invoke the Insurrection Act, where he expected Trump to deputize the Oath Keepers to help maintain order. Rhodes said he kept a large cache of weapons in a nearby hotel awaiting orders from Donald Trump that never came. After a series of mass shootings in the lead up to Thanksgiving, President Joseph Biden has once again called for Congress to ban the sale of assault weapons. Biden said, quote, "The idea we still allow semi-automatic weapons to be purchased is sick." He's right. The Democrats would need 10 Republicans to support the assault weapons ban if they try to pass one during a lame duck session of Congress, with mostly everyone agreeing the votes just aren't there. But if you ask the American people, they would tell you a different story. They want the assault weapons ban. Here is Fox News yesterday.
Take a look at this. Latest Fox News polling shows that 56% of Americans believed that tougher gun laws would reduce the number of U.S. mass shootings.
56 to 39%. The American people want these assault weapons off the street. They want an assault weapons ban. That's what the American people want. A majority of Americans want an assault weapons ban because a majority of Americans don't own guns, and very few own assault weapons. Out of 350 million Americans, maybe 3% at best own an assault weapon. So why are we allowing a handful of mental defectives who fetishize guns to dictate public health policy? Nobody in their right mind wants these guns. Why do we allow this? New reports coming out of Virginia, where a gunman killed 6 co-workers at a Walmart, say that he bought the 9mm handgun only hours before the shooting. There are currently 1.2 guns for every American right now. In 2020, nearly 20,000 Americans were killed by a gun. In that same year, close to 25,000 other Americans used a gun to commit suicide. According to the BBC, since 1968, when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, since 1968, close to 1.7 million Americans have died from gunshots. Let me repeat that. Since 1968, 1.7 million Americans have been shot to death. The BBC goes on to estimate that more Americans have died from guns than all the American soldiers in all the American wars combined. Let that sink in. You got 1.7 million Americans dead from gunshots since 1968. No other country comes close. Think about this. More Americans have died from gunshots in my lifetime than all the American soldiers who died in all the American wars combined. It is more dangerous to stay home from a war in America during the past 50 years than to go off to war. This is insanity. Most Americans want, at the very least, an assault weapons ban. According to investigators working for the House Oversight Committee, American gun manufacturers pocketed more than $1 billion in the past decade selling assault weapons to Americans. And they use a portion of their profits to advertise and advocate and to fund pro-gun groups who perpetuate the lie that owning assault weapons is enshrined into our Bill of Rights. It is not. Sloganeers have convinced hayseeds and rubes who read at a third grade level that all our freedoms flow from the right to bear arms. If you believe that, you are pathetic. On Thanksgiving, a sign outside the Colorado Springs headquarters of Focus on the Family was vandalized to draw attention to the role Focus on the Family played in the shooting at a gay nightclub in Colorado Springs across town, where 5 people died and 17 were wounded. The graffiti over the headquarters of Focus on the Family read, quote, "Their blood is on your hands. 5 lives taken." The Southern Poverty Law Center has called Focus on the Family's founder, James Dobson, anti-LGBTQ. They report that Dobson repeats the lie that homosexuality can be prevented and treated through ex-gay therapy. In 2015, Dobson claimed that one of the chief priorities of the gay movement is to legalize pedophilia. To legalize pedophilia. Dobson's writings are what is now being called stochastic terrorism. It's a new term, stochastic terrorism, at least for me. I first read about it in Scientific American in a piece written by Bryn Nelson, author of Flush, where he describes the way in which lone wolves can be activated by pundits or politicians or preachers who dehumanize other individuals or groups. In his Scientific American piece entitled How Stochastic Terrorism Uses Disgust to Incite Violence, was published earlier this month, Bryn Nelson writes, quote, "Ideologically driven hate speech increases the likelihood that people will violently and unpredictably attack the targets of vicious claims," unquote. Now, stochastic means random. That's what stochastic means. So stochastic terrorism, how does it work? Well, when somebody like Tucker Carlson vilifies drag queens, or Donald Trump amplifies QAnon supporters who promote the idea that Democrats are pedophiles, those words are put out into the ether, and randomly fall into the mind of a lone, sick individual who, because guns are so readily available, acts on what are essentially incitements to violence. That's stochastic terrorism. And the master of stochastic terrorism is Donald Trump. If you watch Donald Trump's January 6th speech on the ellipse, he is deploying stochastic terrorism. He's brilliant at parsing his sentences. Donald Trump can incite violence by never specifically saying, "Go hang Mike Pence." He never says, "Storm the Capitol and kill Nancy Pelosi." What he does do is rile up a group of people who he knew were heavily armed. He knew they were heavily armed. The Secret Service told him these people are carrying weapons. And he said, well, I don't have to worry about them. They're not going to aim them at me. That's what he said on January 6th. He went before his supporters and enraged them. He incited them. He demonized individuals like Pelosi and Pence. He demonized a group, the Democrats. He says, Donald Trump says, just enough to these heavily armed lone wolves who are finding community, finding something bigger than themselves on January 6th by storming the Capitol and committing acts of domestic terrorism. He says just enough for them to engage in violence. That is stochastic terrorism. When Tucker Carlson demonizes the LGBTQ community, when he spreads the libel that drag queens are trying to sexualize children, that is an act of stochastic terrorism, because Tucker Carlson isn't specifically ordering anyone to shoot up a Colorado Springs gay club on drag queen night. So that gives Tucker Carlson plausible deniability. He's not telling anyone to do anything. He's just saying things. Now, does he know his words are reckless? He doesn't care. And yes, it is all protected by freedom of speech. To a limit, but it is protected mostly by freedom of speech. But freedom of speech also includes the right of Bryn Nelson to write in Scientific American that these right-wing television and radio personalities and Donald Trump and these preachers like Dobson, they create violent disgust in the minds of dangerous people. And disgust is a powerful emotion. It causes acts of violence. Disgust, when you are disgusted with someone or something, that provokes violence. We are all disgusted by pedophiles. So for Tucker Carlson to accuse drag queens of, quote, sexualizing our children, or for James Dobson from Focus on the Family to accuse homosexuals of wanting to legalize pedophilia, they are creating disgust, a type of disgust that can provoke someone to take revenge by shooting up a gay nightclub in Colorado Springs, or break into Nancy Pelosi's home and try to break her kneecaps. Yes, Tucker Carlson is free to say anything he wants, but that also means I'm free to say that Tucker Carlson or Focus on the Family all have the blood of the LGBTQ community on their hands. The Focus on the Family doesn't like graffiti. What about freedom of speech, freedom of expression? Oh, you don't like freedom of expression when somebody spray paints on your headquarters, their blood is on your hands. Oh, I guess freedom of speech has its limits. When Tucker Carlson or James Dobson or Ron DeSantis, when they draw a line between pedophilia and drag queen, by throwing that out there in front of millions of people, you are committing vile acts of stochastic terrorism. You have no idea which lunatic with a gun is going to commit a random act of terrorism against the people you demonize. But make sure you understand, somebody, one of your followers, is going to kill somebody, and that blood is on your hands. That blood is on your hands, Tucker Carlson. That blood is on your hands, Ron DeSantis. That blood is on your hands, Dobson, James Dobson from Focus on the Family. When you erase transgender people the way Ron DeSantis or Dave Chappelle do, they are not ordering anyone to beat up a transgender woman. That's not what stochastic terrorists do. All they need to do is vilify a group, create just enough disgust, and then you find, as Bryn Nelson writes in Scientific American, that transgender people end up 4 times as likely to be victims of violence as cisgender people are, not to mention the suicides. This is the dad of the alleged shooter of the gay nightclub. This is the dad, besides being one of the world's leading Josh Brolin impersonators. This dad of the alleged shooter, he's the father of the kid who allegedly shot up the gay nightclub in Colorado Springs. He spoke to reporters last week. Watch the relief he expresses when he discovers that his son went into a gay nightclub not to dance, but to kill everyone. Pay attention to what he says, how relieved he is to discover that his son is not gay.
He's accused of going on a mass shooting at a gay bar and killing 5 people.
Colorado.
Okay, well, that's shit. If he's accused of doing that, this guy's not gay. I say that, but he's not gay.
At least he's not gay. Let me play that again, because this cretin, and I do mean cretin, kind of slurs his words.
He's accused of going on a mass shooting at a gay bar and killing 5 people.
Colorado.
Okay, well, that's shit. If he's accused of doing that, this guy's not gay. I say that, but he's not gay.
See, this is why stochastic terrorism exists. The son allegedly acted on somebody's words. Look at this father. Can't you see him acting on somebody's words? This is a man who raised his son to feel nothing but disgust for homosexuals and was so determined and insistent on creating disgust in his son when it came to homosexuality, he unwittingly, he himself, the father, provoked a random act of stochastic terrorism. Here is some more of this wonderful father.
The gay bar.
Yeah, right. And
I was like, oh my God, is he gay? As a scare, oh my God, shit, is he gay? And he's not gay, so it's
well, you guys had conversations about that. You were.
Oh yeah,
you
adamant
told him. Yeah, you were adamant that gay is bad.
I'm a Mormon. I'm a conservative Republican, and we don't do gay. We don't do gay.
Yeah.
Let's watch that again, shall we? Let's watch this again.
The gay bar.
Yeah, right. And
I was like, oh my God, is he gay? As a scare, oh my God, shit, is he gay? And he's not gay, so it's
well, you guys had conversations about that. You were.
Oh yeah,
you
I was
told
adamant.
him. Yeah, you were adamant that gay is bad.
I'm a Mormon. I'm a conservative Republican, and we don't do gay. We don't do gay.
Yeah.
I'm a Mormon. I'm a conservative Republican. We don't do gay. Do you see how evil this is? When you bring religion into homophobia, the same way Osama bin Laden used religion to rouse acts of terrorism, when you bring religion into this father says he's a Mormon. Focus on the Family is a religious organization. They use religion to bring a moral righteousness to demonizing the LGBTQ community, and it results in death. It results in death, either by suicide or someone like this guy's son who allegedly, from what I've been reading, was disgusted by their own sexuality and decided drag queens are to blame for the way they wanted to have sex. So they went in there and shot up a gay bar. Words have consequences. You know, Elon Musk has said he's going to reinstate all the suspended accounts on Twitter. So we can expect QAnon accounts to return to Twitter. And with that, even more conspiracy theories and hate speech. Now, I'm a champion of free speech. And I think the solution, as they say, to bad speech is more speech. But the solution to homophobia isn't more homophobia. The solution to racism isn't more racism. So yeah, the antidote to bad speech is more speech, but not more hate speech. I don't want to be responsible on this platform for hate speech. And I certainly don't want to support anybody who sponsors hate speech. There is something the gatekeepers of radio and television understand. They've understood it from the beginning. And when you get to the mainstream, where everybody's woke, you know, Disney's woke, CBS, they're all woke, except for Fox and Netflix. Everybody else is woke. When you talk about the big networks, the big cable channels, the big corporate studios, they know that certain people, certain ideas, while they're free to have these ideas and free to say them, they don't belong on our platform. The heads of these major networks and studios self-censor. It's a norm, a convention. It's a code of ethics, a code of conduct. Yes, in theory, anybody should be allowed to espouse whatever they want on radio, on television, or in a movie. And on certain parts of AM radio, in fact, all of AM radio, that's what they do. When it comes to Muslims, the blacks, Hispanics, the LGBTQ community, the Asians, you can hear all that on AM and FM radio. But for the most part, people who own the corporations, who own television and radio stations, movie studios, especially in big markets, they have a simple code when it comes to the kind of speech that you hear from Dave Chappelle, Ron DeSantis, Tucker Carlson, and even James Dobson, who was syndicated on CBS but never ever said the things about the LGBTQ community that he said in his writings and his lectures. The big corporations, as evil as they are, and they are evil, they subscribe to a simple code when it comes to this kind of speech. Somewhere else, but not here. Not talking about censorship. I'm saying somewhere else, but not here. Kind of like my dinner table, kind of like your dinner table, kind of like your classroom. Somewhere else, but not here. And believe it or not, there are still plenty of people in charge of corporations, classrooms, universities, schools, who say about this type of speech, somewhere else, not here, not at my dinner table. What does it mean? It means not here. It means when Joe Rogan foolishly says Kanye West should be interviewed and questioned about his anti-Semitism, when Joe Rogan foolishly says the more we talk to Kanye, the more he can be reasoned with, and we can explain why he's wrong, the proper response to Joe Rogan is somewhere else, not here. Not on Joe Rogan in front of millions of people. Why expose Kanye's toxic beliefs to anyone other than a team of psychiatrists? Now, if Kanye wanted to be on my show, and he is insane, so it's possible he might do something as stupid as want to come here, I would say somewhere else, but not here. Because I don't want to amplify his ideas. Because giving Kanye a platform when he so clearly needs to be given medication, it ends up being an act of stochastic terrorism. The wrong people will hear Kanye. The wrong person could hear Kanye. They will agree with him. They will be recruited. They will become converts to his bigotry. And all it takes is just one. And that is what Joe Rogan fails to understand about Kanye when he says you can reason with Kanye. You can talk it out with Kanye. You cannot reason with a bigot, a racist, a homophobe, an anti-Semite. You can only, and this is what I told my kids, this is what I came up with a long time ago, you can only identify, isolate, and ignore. Identify, isolate, and ignore. This is what you do with abusers. Identify the bigot, isolate the bigot, and then ignore the bigot. Now, again, I know Kanye is free to say whatever he wants. Not here. Not on this show. And anyone who thinks it's okay to dignify his mental illness by bringing him on their show and thinking he should be heard, then you're irresponsible. You're part of the problem. Again, I am not saying the government should silence Kanye. I'm saying anyone who chooses to amplify his sickness is, by definition, a terrorist, a stochastic terrorist. Kanye needs to be identified, isolated, and ignored. When a comedian erases a transgender person, when a preacher or a pundit demonizes drag queens and draws a link between drag queens and pedophilia, they are contributing to and provoking violence against those people. No censorship. I'm not calling for censorship. No jail time. But norms of civilization dictate that the people who know right from wrong, it is their responsibility to vocally identify, isolate, and ignore. Identify the bigot or the abuser, isolate the bigot or the abuser, make sure they can't come near you, and if it's physical abuse, call the cops, and ignore. Ignore. Don't let them, as they say, take up any real estate in your brain. This goes with all abusive people. Identify them as abusive. Label them. This is an abusive person. Isolate them. Keep them away from you and others, and ignore them. They're not worthy of your attention. Now, let me just say a few words about bigotry and abuse. Homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, all forms of bigotry are abusive. When you engage in that kind of talk, it is abusive, and it leads maybe not to your resorting to physical abuse, but stochastic terrorism. It's a new term we're learning. This term teaches us that maybe your words are violent, but you're not physically violent, but your words trigger people to turn violent. Let's be clear here. Marjorie Taylor Greene is an abuser. Marie Newman, who was on the show, Congressman Marie Newman, has a transgender daughter. Marjorie Taylor Greene terrorized this congresswoman with signs and protests and heckling about the daughter. Marjorie Taylor Greene is an abuser. Nick Fuentes, the 24-year-old Nazi, is an abuser. Milo Yiannopoulos, who is advising Kanye, is an abuser. Kanye is an abuser. Tucker Carlson is an abuser. Dave Chappelle is an abuser. The comedy he does about transgender women is abusive. Abusers and their enablers always get defensive. They get triggered. Isn't it interesting when you call them abusive or homophobic or racist or anti-Semitic? It triggers something in them and they can't take it. It's okay for bullies to abuse us, but when we say to them, you know, you're being abusive, you're homophobic, anti-Semitic, you're racist, that's censorship, you're abusing me, I can't. I mean, all Dave Chappelle talks about on SNL and his 25th Netflix special is they're deplatforming me. Typical bullies. So, and they have enablers. They have their fans who follow them. So the way abusers and their enablers always work is they attempt to set the parameters for what constitutes abuse, right? They say they're not being abusive, right? I've been Jew baited. If you're a woman, if you've been harassed, the person doing it always says, oh, come on, you're taking it the wrong way. Don't tell me how to take your abuse. The victims, not the abuser or his enablers, the victims define what is abusive. It is the victims who decide how they get to feel about the abuse. The abuser and his enablers don't dictate whether or not their behavior is abusive. It's how it's being received by the abused. So if a handful of transgender women or Jews find Dave Chappelle's material abusive, he's the one in a civilized society who needs to change his abusive behavior. He's the one who has to change. We don't have to change the way we receive it. If he doesn't understand why it's abusive, it's his responsibility to learn why it's offensive, why it's abusive. He doesn't get to dictate how we're supposed to feel. Don't you dare punch me and then tell me why I'm taking it the wrong way. Don't you dare tell an African American to find common ground with Nick Fuentes, to talk it out. Abuse is abuse. I'm sorry that Donald Trump or Steve Bannon or Kanye or Nick Fuentes or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Dave Chappelle and all their enablers get triggered and get upset by what we say when we call them transphobic or anti-Muslim or anti-woman or anti-Semitic. But these are the rules of the road. Instead of telling transgender women or Arabs or Muslims or Hispanics or Asians or transgender women or Jews how they should feel, try listening to somebody other than your simple-minded, parochial echo chamber. Give that a try, because those are the rules of the road now. You don't dictate how we're supposed to receive your violence. You have to listen to somebody other than your simple-minded, parochial echo chamber. Listen to the LGBTQ community. Listen to blacks, Muslims, Arabs, women, Jews, Asians in America who right now are terrified because of Donald Trump opening up a can of stochastic terrorism. It was always there. I mean, Rush Limbaugh was a stochastic terrorist, But when Donald Trump became president, the gloves were off for bigots. Listen to the people who say they're terrified. Don't tell me not to be terrified from your behavior. Don't tell me how to feel about your abusive behavior. Listen to the people who say you're abusing them, or don't. Don't. That's freedom of speech, freedom of behavior. No, nobody's going to lock you up. Go ahead. Ignore my feelings. And try, I'm going to isolate you and ignore you, but go ahead and instruct us on how to feel so we can make our abuser feel comfortable. That's what abusers do. They dictate our behavior so we can make the abuser feel comfortable. See where that gets you in 2022 and 2023 moving forward. See where that gets you. The world is changing. So this is why these people need guns, because they're in the minority and they can't use their mouths anymore to express their hatred. So they do need guns. And that's why I am so opposed to guns. This is why we need an assault weapons ban, because these abusive people cannot defend their words. And so they resort to might makes right. It's my gun, so I say so. But the rest of the world that doesn't allow its citizens to buy assault weapons, and again, it's only a handful of deviants who own assault weapons here in America. The rest of the world is changing. And we're not allowing the abusers or their enablers to define what constitutes abuse or how the abused should feel about getting abused. The world is change. Change with it or get left behind. Sit with your guns, stockpile your weapons, see where that gets you. It doesn't surprise me that Dave Chappelle still smokes cigarettes. He's still smoking cigarettes. It doesn't surprise me that Donald Trump is a morbidly obese pig who eats at McDonald's. The rest of us who are civilized, we evolve, we learn. When we offend somebody, we ask, oh, I'm sorry, what did I do wrong? And then you adjust accordingly. Now, I wish everybody, including Trump, Kanye, Nick Fuentes, Chappelle, Steve Bannon, Kanye, and all their enablers, a gentle, inclusive heart. I do. I hope they learn to evolve. But history will destroy them. History will destroy them. You need to change. Like the Mormons. You need to change like the Mormons. Now, I should mention Senator Mitt Romney is a Mormon. And 2 weeks ago, he voted to advance the Respect for Marriage Act in the Senate. And the Mormon Church has come out in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act. In a statement on November 15th, the Mormon leadership said it still believes, now listen to this, because I happen to think this is beautiful. This is how America is supposed to work. The Mormon leadership said it still believes marriage is between a man and a woman. But because certain religious freedoms were baked into the Respect for Marriage Act, they said they will support this bill. They will support the Respect for Marriage Act. I cannot get the Mormon leadership, I cannot get them to see that marriage is not solely between a man and a woman. I can't win that. But what I can do, not I, this is what the LGBTQ community, Larry Kramer, I mean, this is what the heroes of the LGBTQ community have accomplished. They can't get the Mormon Church to see marriage the way they do, but they got the Mormon Church to see them. That's how America is supposed to be. Compromise, compromise. That's what democracy is. Compromise. You don't have to change completely. You just have to recognize that the things you believe in, other people don't. And as long as they don't force it on you, we all live happily ever after. Chip Roy. I talk a lot about Chip Roy, Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, Republican. I bring him up a lot because I happen to believe he is one of the most dangerous politicians in Washington. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and Chip Roy has a little knowledge. You know, lawyer, he was Ted Cruz's chief of staff. A little knowledge of the Constitution is a dangerous thing. Chip Roy is a gun nut, Freedom Caucus, so he's a nut, a dangerous nut who holds, and I've brought this up before, and this is really important, so I'm going to review it and show you how dangerous a little knowledge is. He subscribes to the insurrection theory of the Second Amendment, where our founding fathers, so he thinks, wanted to give ordinary citizens weapons to take arms against the government when it becomes tyrannical. And this is what the sloganeers say. I've been getting into it with Second Amendment people this week because I wrote some things, I said some things about outlawing all guns, and it provoked a lot of NRA people to spew these copy and paste talking points that they get from the gun manufacturers, the multi-billion-dollar gun manufacturers and the NRA. It's all copy and paste. So there's an idea out there. It's the insurrection theory of the Second Amendment. It is so dangerous and such bullshit. It's a bromide that the gun manufacturers have pushed on the simpletons who want to buy guns, and the gun manufacturers want to sell them guns. Our founding fathers didn't create a constitution with all these checks and balances so that disgruntled gun nuts can come around and scream tyranny, grab their guns, storm the Capitol or the White House, and overthrow the government. That's not what our founding father. There is no insurrection theory to the Second Amendment. It was invented by people. It was invented by Madison Avenue, basically, to sell more guns. Our founding fathers, if you want to go back to original intent, our founding fathers only wanted white male landowners to vote. That's it. So if you want to go to the original intent, Chip, they didn't want the American people to vote, let alone, they didn't want them to own guns. And they certainly never wanted to leave it to gun nuts like Chip Roy to decide what is tyranny. Let's talk this out for a second, okay? Because there are some fiery speeches that Chip Roy has delivered on the floor of the House about how we need guns to protect the American people from a tyrannical government. So that sounds like, I've thought about that. I go, well, that sounds almost reasonable until you think about it. Okay, tell me who gets to decide when our government is officially tyrannical. Chip Roy, tell me, what is the yardstick that signals, this is officially a tyrannical government, time to take up arms against it? Who gets to decide that? Is there a court, a commission that decides this government is officially tyrannical, have at it? I would love him to answer that question. You moron. You Chip Roy, a dangerous moron. This is why I'm against guns, because dangerous morons cling to their guns. So play this out for me, a wise and scholarly Chip Roy with your law degree. Answer this question. Who decides America has come under the spell of a tyrannical government? Who gets to decide? The people stockpiling weapons? Do they get to say, okay, this is tyranny? This is just a complete misreading of the Constitution and the Second Amendment in the service of selling more weapons. That's all this is. This is just sloganeering from Madison Avenue for the arms dealers. Chip Roy, Ted Cruz, he was Ted Cruz's chief of staff, and Ted Cruz takes more money from the gun industry than any other politician in Washington. Chip Roy takes his money from the multi-billion-dollar gun industry, and he'll say anything to get his money. So you're a lunatic, Chip Roy. You're deeply troubled, and you're depraved. What is this vision you have for America, where the people take arms against the mythical tyranny? Again, I don't know how you decide when it's officially tyrannical. Seems somewhat dangerous to leave that up to, I don't know, a militia to declare America is a tyranny. I don't know, maybe the people who gathered on the ellipse January 6th and stormed the Capitol, do they get to decide our government is tyrannical? Describe the landscape for us after you've decided this is a tyrannical government, Chip Roy. What does America look like? Well, apparently, because I'm going to play a speech of his, a little clip, apparently Chip Roy's landscape post-overthrow of the tyrannical government of the United States is a Hobbesian nightmare of warlords and militia leaders, gun-toting strong men controlling their own swaths of land, charging people for protection, complete chaos, a complete breakdown in the social order. That is Chip Roy's, Congressman Chip Roy's, insurrection theory of the Second Amendment. He has no plan for how we decide the government's a tyranny and what comes after. And this is the Republican Party. This is what they believe because they are bought and paid for by the NRA. This is the conservative party in the United States. This is how far the gun manufacturers have twisted the core ideology of the Republican Party, which is conservatism, okay? Here you have people who call themselves conservatives preaching, in the service of gun ownership, mayhem, a permanent riot. That is the opposite of conservatism, okay? But this is what Chip Roy, this is what the Freedom Caucus believes in. This is what Ted Cruz, this is what the Republican Party believes. In gun rights, right? They believe that the government becomes tyrannical, we overthrow it. Who overthrows it? Who? We haven't figured that one out. What happens after we overthrow the government? See, conservatism is the complete opposite of that. Edmund Burke, his writing, he's an Irish-British philosopher. His writing is, or thanks to people like Chip Roy, was the source of modern-day conservative thought. Edmund Burke saw the chaos that came from the French Revolution And in 1790, he wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France. He was a Brit who saw what the French were enduring after they beheaded the king. So Edmund Burke is the father of modern day conservatism because he champions the old order through morality. He maintains in Reflections on the Revolution in France that when the old order breaks down, you end up with Robespierre, the Committee of Public Safety, blood on the street, and the guillotine. Conservative thought, up until gun nuts like Chip Roy, infiltrated the Republican Party, conservative thought was maintaining the established order and fixing it ever so slightly from within. Conservatives, up until recently, were heirs to Edmund Burke's precepts of conserving what civilization has built, thus a conservative. But no longer. Now we just storm the Capitol. Now we take arms against the government when we don't approve of it. Storm the Capitol, it's tyranny. So I'm going to play you a clip of this very dangerous and demented Chip Roy. I think he drinks. I don't know, but it sounds like he's liquored up. So Kevin McCarthy, incredibly stupid man, wants to be speaker. And there's a rebellion going on inside the Republican Party. Chip Roy is a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. They screwed with McCarthy before. They don't like him. And he is complaining in this clip about how Mitch McConnell over in the Senate and how McCarthy are rallying the Republican Party and not catering to the House Freedom Caucus. He's accusing Kevin McCarthy of negotiating with people, and I'm using the term loosely when I'm referring to Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's buying the silence. McCarthy is buying the silence of Marjorie Taylor Greene by giving her committee assignments. She was stripped of her committee assignments. So McCarthy is making deals with people who we thought were conservative firebrands. And this is driving Chip Roy further nuts. He's already nuts. Watch Second Amendment gun nut Chip Roy tear down the idea of compromise. I was just talking about how the Mormon Church and Mitt Romney have compromised on same-sex marriage. Here is gun nut Chip Roy tearing down the idea of government, of compromise. This is the man who believes that the Second Amendment has an insurrection, an unseen insurrection clause. Well, watch his mind at work. Watch him paint the world he wants to live in, where we don't elect leaders like Kevin McCarthy. We just follow them, that there's a natural order of things to follow the most powerful.
Stop kissing each other's rear ends, asking and begging for some slot on a committee. We didn't come here to be on committees. We didn't come here to get a title. The titles around this place. Who is in leadership? Leadership. In leadership.
Hang on for 1 second. I was muted. He says we didn't come here for committees. We didn't come here for committees. What did you come here for then, Chip Roy? Why did you come to Washington, D.C. if you didn't want to go to hearings and committees and compromise?
Something you recognize and follow. The titles around this place. Who is in leadership? Leadership. Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect?
Let me play that again.
Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect? Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect? Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect?
What a piece of shit, Chip Roy. Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect. This is the gun nut. This is what the House Freedom Caucus believes, that leadership is something you recognize and follow, not someone you elect. Well, why would you recognize and follow someone? They've got a gun. Their gun is bigger than yours. These are dangerous, sick people owned and operated by even more dangerous and even sicker people, the NRA, who are owned and operated by the gun manufacturers. These are the people. They have no logic. They cannot back up their argument for assault weapons, but they just shout it. They think if they write it in all caps, it has to be true. The only thing that stops a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun. Never happens. Never happens. In Colorado, the shooter was subdued by an Army veteran with his hands. Occasionally, somebody will show up with a gun after the bad guy with the gun killed 5 or 6 people, and once or twice they take them out. But they just spew these bromides, these slogans, and they just keep saying it over and over again, where it almost sounds true. Like, yeah, our founding fathers gave us the Second Amendment to protect the citizenry from a tyrannical government. Oh, okay, that sounds reasonable. Play it out for me, Chip, you piece of shit. It's really quite remarkable how far gone Chip Roy is. He literally lets slip that leadership isn't elected. This is the man who believes in the insurrection clause, the hidden insurrection clause of the Second Amendment. He just wants to shut down Washington. He was elected to come to Washington. He said it, not to sit on committees. He's there to destroy Washington, to take a wrecking ball to Washington. He just wants everyone to own a gun. And whoever has the biggest gun and the most ammo wins. I would call Chip Roy a Neanderthal, but I've learned that Neanderthals survived through cooperation. And then they didn't survive. But he doesn't believe in cooperation. He believes in isolation. Leave me alone. Sick. Speaking of very sick, the January 6th committee called Kellyanne Conway to testify yesterday. Now, the January 6th committee will be disbanded on, I believe it's January 3rd, right? 2023. That's when the new Congress takes over. You can be sure with Republicans in charge, they're not interested in what happened on January 6th. They know what happened on January 6th, and they don't want to talk about it. So before the January 6th committee issues their final report, they're going at a pretty fevered pace right now. And yesterday, Kellyanne Conway testified. That must have been interesting when she put her hand on the Bible. I, Kellyanne Conway, do solemnly swear that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, some half-truths, a few alternative truths, and nothing but some facsimile of the truth, so help me God. Mike Pence was in Chicago on Monday promoting his new book, and when asked about his old boss, Donald Trump, hosting Kanye West and Nick Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago, Pence, seen here scolding his penis, Pence said, and I quote, "President Trump was wrong to give a white nationalist, an anti-Semite, and a Holocaust denier a seat at the table, and I think he should apologize for that." Oh, okay. Well, Trump's dinner with Kanye has split Republicans right down the middle. Half of them are furious that Trump hosted an anti-Semite. The other half are angry he hosted a black man. This is what Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, had to say yesterday.
So for Donald Trump to dine with notorious white supremacists and unrepentant bigots, I think at a minimum, Sarah, it's clarifying. He is trying to make America hate again and running arguably the most unapologetic white nationalist presidential campaign we've ever seen.
I was going to say that bell that went off. I won't do the joke. I'm not going to do it. There are a lot of jokes I would have made before Trump was president, but I'm scared. I'm scared. But I do have a lot of Republican friends, and I know for a fact there's absolutely no room in the Republican Party for white supremacists or anti-Semites. Literally, there's no room. All the seats are taken. It's standing room only, and somebody's going to call the fire marshal. If you enjoyed today's segment of The David Feldman Show, this is the news segment, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with your friends. Please do me a favor. You would be amazed at how simply sharing this, one of you, if just one of you, I don't know why, but if one of you shares this on social media or through email, it triggers the gatekeepers and it puts the show out in front of more people. I don't understand why, but it does. One share, that's all it takes. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.